My name is Mariano Francisco Sierra Bastida, and today I'm gonna be presenting about Lisa or Rabies. Lisa is the direct translation from English to Greek for the word rabies, and Lisa is the goddess of madness in Greek mythology. So, first of all, what is rabies? Rabies is a virus. A virus is a type of organism that it's not able to replicate itself, and by not being able to replicate itself, since it lacks the cellular machinery to do it, it's gonna hijack a host cell that it's gonna do all the work for the virus, making more copies of it. Zoonotic. This means that it's gonna be able to be transmitted between different kinds of species, especially animal species. It belongs to the Rhabdoviridae family, which is a very specific kind of family that targets warm-blooded vertebrae. So that's why we can see it on different kinds of mammals and sometimes even in birds. It's part of the Lisa virus genus. So going from the family to the genus, the Lisa virus. Lisa virus, pretty self-explanatory. The viruses of madness. Its size is about 60 nanometers to 180 nanometers, which means that it's super small, and we're gonna actually see that in comparison to the cells that it targets. It's bullet shaped. As you can see in the image, it has like this kind of projectile shape, which is gonna help us with the classification of the virus. Then it has a negative sense and non-segmented RNA. What does this mean? Negative sense means that it's gonna go in the opposite to human DNA. So instead of going from 5 primates to 3 primates, it's gonna go from 3 primates to 5 primates. And this actually gonna come into play because one of the structures, or one of the main things that the virus have, that is an RNA polymerase, is gonna help with that. Non-segmented means that it's all together. So there's not gonna be like any kind of spaces between the strand, which means that it's gonna be just one whole piece for the RNA of the virus. Then it's made out of 5 genes. So the whole virus is made of 5 genes mainly. We have the L, that stands for RNA viral polymerase. This is the main thing that is gonna help with the replication of the virus by changing, well, there's gonna be various mechanisms of the cell that are gonna come into that, right? But mainly the one that is gonna change the RNA to DNA, so the ribosomes in our cells can start replicating, is gonna be the RNA viral polymerase. Then we have the phosphoprotein. So this one, there's not, in the research that I made, there's not like a specific conclusive reason why is it there. They say that it helps with regulating the production of the virus, because since if it produces too much, it's gonna stress the cell a lot, and this one is gonna explode. So the research and the articles that I saw say that it helps with that. Then we have the matrix protein. This is the main protein that joins the capsid of the virus and the envelope. Then we have the glycoprotein, or G, which is gonna be the little spikes that we see outside. These are gonna be the ones that are gonna be in charge of attaching to the host cell. And we have N, nucleoprotein. So this protein is gonna be super, like in every single kind of RNA or DNA, we have a nucleoprotein. This one's gonna be in charge of replication and binding the RNA together, and it's like very, very, very important in general. Then we have structure. The structure is made of proteins, RNA, the lipid bilayer, which is actually something that's gonna come in handy in a little bit, and enzymes. So, how is rabies transmitted? Well, the main hosts are gonna be warm-blooded vertebrae. This means birds and mammals. Even though there has been some cases of birds, the main ones that are gonna be affected by this are gonna be the mammals. In the United States, wild animals are still the main reason why rabies is a problem to this day, since we don't have a vaccination record of them. But in most parts of the world, stray dogs are gonna be the main responsibles, places or regions like Southwest Asia or Central Africa. Rabies is gonna be transmitted mainly through one of these 4 fluids, or the 4 of them: saliva, urine, blood, and cerebrospinal fluid. The main responsible is saliva. Whenever the picture of a dog biting you or a wild animal biting you, and rabies enters your bloodstream. But urine, blood, and cerebrospinal fluid can also be a reason why you can get rabies. This comes in hand whenever there's like a transplant or any procedure in lab that requires one of these fluids besides saliva. The personnel of laboratory personnel need to be very careful about it. So, aggressive behavior is one of the main reasons why rabies it's very easily transmittable. So you're not gonna bite, or an animal is not gonna bite you if you don't attack them. But with rabies, there's a low serotonin activity in the brain, which means that it's gonna turn very aggressive. So even if it's not like an aggressive animal, even if it's your dog or your cat or a random raccoon that will never attack you just because of the sake of it, with rabies, there's gonna be a need to attack you, which is gonna help it further in the transmission. There are some risky zones in the world, as I mentioned, Southwest Asia and Central Africa. Those are the main focus of rabies right now. And the way that we can control rabies cases in the world is through animal vaccination. So places like the United States, Europe mainly, and also Mexico, for example, and Canada, they have been able to control rabies through a very rigorous plan of vaccination for dogs, cats, and other domesticated mammals. So, why is rabies so lethal? Well, first of all, rabies is a stealthy virus. What do we mean by this? We mean basically that your immune system is not going to be able to detect rabies until it's too late. Why is it gonna be too late? Because it targets the nervous system. By targeting the nervous system, since it is classified as an immune privileged zone by your body, this means that there's not gonna be like a significant presence of immune cells that are gonna charge into attacking rabies once it starts attacking the nervous system. So also another part of why is it so lethal is because of the acetylcholine and axonal transport. So acetylcholine is basically a neurotransmitter that travels through your body to give instructions to your muscles. Rabies binds to that. Rabies binds in the muscles to that and travels through the muscles into the brain. And axonal transport, it means that it uses the axons of the neurons to go further, like from the outer layer of a neuron into the nucleus of a neuron. Also, it binds to dynein. This has to do with axonal transport. It uses the axon and then it moves through dynein. Dynein is going to be a motor protein located in the neuron that is going to walk the virus from the outer layer of the neuron into the nucleus. Another thing, so that is how it travels. But its defenses, they are insane, since the cell pathway for apoptosis is inhibited in neurons. The best line of defense that compromised cells have for any virus is committing suicide, committing apoptosis. This pathway is inhibited by rabies, either by inhibitors of apoptosis being replicated by the virus, or the necessary proteins or enzymes that are going to be used for apoptosis being denied by the virus. Also, it manipulates the production of cytokines. What does this mean? It means that it's gonna shut the alarm of your body. So whenever you have any kind of infection or virus, cytokines are gonna start raising the alarm for your body to inflammate. Well, in this case, rabies is gonna manipulate the production of them through the neurons. And apoptosis is encouraged on T cells. This means that it's gonna protect its fabric, the neuron, the one that's gonna be in charge of replicating the virus, but our first line of defense against rabies is gonna be rendered useless. T cells are gonna commit suicide by just interacting with an infected cell, with an infected neuron. And after it takes the whole control of the nervous system and the neurons, it's basically gonna travel through your body through the bloodstream, and it's gonna be indiscriminate with which organs it's gonna infect. So now let's talk about when is it rabies. We're gonna have two main types of rabies here. First is gonna be the paralytic or silent rabies, which is basically like a coma and the patient is gonna be unresponsive, and furious rabies, which is more related with what we usually picture as this is the rabies that we usually picture. So, first of all, we need to check the epidemiological geographic record. This means we need to be sure that the zone where the patient was bitten by an animal, it's a place where there's history of rabies, where there are animals that have been detected to have rabies in that place. Then we need to go through the symptomatology. So for both of the rabies, we're gonna have a coma eventually. In paralytic rabies, it's gonna be more prevalent. Like the whole stage is probably gonna be like a coma. We're gonna have seizures in both of them, in both furious and silent rabies. We're gonna have severe migraines. It's gonna be more noticeable on furious rabies since the patient is gonna be screaming and it's gonna be having like very, very, very aggressive behavior. But paralytic rabies, severe migraines are also a part of that. Hallucinations. For furious rabies, we're gonna have hallucinations. The patient is gonna be hearing seeing things. Is gonna be distrusting of people, shadow people, and they're gonna be seeing and hearing things that they aren't there necessarily. We're gonna have hydrophobia, another of the scary things about furious rabies. We're gonna have an irrational fear of water. The so-called elixir of life we're gonna be afraid of that, and not because there's any specific characteristic with water, but because it's gonna hurt so much to just swallow it that the patient is gonna have like an immediate reaction just to imagining the pain of swallowing water. We're gonna have paresthesia, some kind of numbness in the area that was bitten. We're gonna have excessive salivation. In both of them, it's gonna be more noticeable in furious rabies, but paralytic rabies, it's also like a staple of that. We're gonna have weakness also, fatigue. The patient is not gonna be able to move after a while. Mostly in paralytic rabies, but in furious rabies, after a while, the patient is just gonna be fading out. And the 4 stages of rabies are going to be the incubation stage, the prodrome stage, the acute neurological period, coma, and death are basically the same because the coma is eventually going to lead to the respiratory failure. Now you're going to be able to see in this video how a patient suffering from paralytic rabies and how it looks. So as you can see there's the excessive salivation. The nurse taking care is gonna remove their hand because it's gonna be very dangerous if there's any, as mentioned before, any contact with the saliva of the infected patient. And the patient is basically not there at all, not present. Now, for the reason that I made this presentation, let's talk about the Milwaukee Protocol. So, the Milwaukee Protocol was developed by Rodney Willoughby Jr. in 2004. It is designed as a last resort for rabies. So, this is after symptoms are already present in the patient. The vaccine is you can usually get it before you get the symptoms, especially after the bite. But once symptoms are settled, the vaccine is not effective at all. So here's where the Milwaukee Protocol it's supposed to go in. It consists of artificial induced coma. You put the patient in an artificial coma, so the vitals and the organs and everything are constantly regulated. You're gonna be constantly injecting the patient with antiviral medications to stimulate the response of the immune system. There's gonna be intensive supportive care. You're not gonna have your patient do anything since they're gonna be in a coma, and you really need to take care of every single thing of the patient. So the patient body is only focus or its only focus of the body is on protecting itself against rabies. And you're gonna be constantly modulating the immune response. If it's gonna be well, if it's too low, if it's too high, you're constantly gonna be checking that in order to administer the correct antiviral medications for the patient. Sadly, as a last resort, this is still pretty ineffective. The success rate of the Milwaukee protocol is 13.8%, which is not really high. That's why it's still considered experimental. So the very low success rate and also the very specific kind of the side effects that it has are really really bad. That's another thing why. And yeah, that's the Milwaukee protocol. But the Milwaukee protocol that we're gonna be talking about right now is gonna be the one made by the patients. So the patients is a group of music that are usually creating different kind of songs based on illnesses. In this case, rabies is gonna be the main focus. The songs, the albums made by the patients are gonna be distributed in 4 albums, the whole number of the songs, and it's gonna be based in reports of actual patients of rabies and physicians that have attended to the case of a patient with rabies and developed rabies already. Now, for the first song of the album and the first stage of rabies, let's talk about incubation. So, incubation is between 20 to 90 days, but there's been some cases where incubation can be 4 days or a year. It pretty much depends, but in adults it's between 20 and 90 days. No symptoms are presented during this stage. The virus is traveling through the body, so it's not gonna give away its cover. This is the perfect time you have to administer the vaccine, and the distance from the head and the severity of the bite are really gonna affect on how fast is the incubation period. If the bite is super bad and it reaches the bones, it's gonna be faster. If you have a bite that is closer to the head, the time of incubation is also gonna be faster. And here's when the first song of the album comes in. The first album comes in that it's incubation period, and you're gonna listen to a sample of it. As you can hear, it's kind of a relaxing sound, very mild, just like a little disturbance. It sounds kind of eerie because there's something lurking in the back, and this thing that is lurking is rabies. When the incubation phase concludes, now is when we move to prodromal. Prodromal is gonna be the phase where it's gonna last from 2 to 10 days. It usually lasts about a week. This is where symptoms are gonna start presenting, very mild symptoms, weakness, paresthesia in the place where the wound happened, headaches, fever, and discomfort, but nothing really bad. Now is when rabies is already in your nervous system. Now is when it's starting to replicate itself. Vaccine by now is basically ineffective, and this is gonna be represented with the next audio sample. As you can hear, this song is little more disturbing. There was something lurking in the back in the shadows on the last song, when this one is starting to make some presence. It's coming slowly but steadily. And this is the part when we reach the acute neurological period. So this can last between 2 to 7 days. Symptoms in paralytic and fierce rabies are gonna vary. In paralytic rabies, it's gonna be the loss of sensation, loss of mobility, numbness, and it's gonna be a little bit less lethal than fierce rabies, but it's still gonna be hell on earth. For fierce rabies, we're gonna have hallucinations, hydrophobia, aggressive behavior, and seizures. So the stereotypical case of rabies. And by now, rabies has gained total control of the nervous system. Death by now is almost guaranteed, and this is gonna be represented with the next sample of audio. Little disclaimer, if maybe just lower the volume, it's gonna be a little bit high. Noise. By now, the patient is only hearing noise. The picture and the audio represents how the patient is living through a hell on earth, and everything around it starts looking distorted, and it just looks eerie, it just looks bad, it looks frightening. Your body enters into a fight or flight response, and it just hears noise. For the final stage of rabies, it's gonna be coma and death. This lasts between 1 to 14 days. The symptoms, they're the same in fierce rabies and paralytic rabies. Patient falls into a coma, organs start gradually failing, and the most common cause of death in rabies patients in this stage is respiratory failure. Rabies has taken all control over the body, and by now it's almost guaranteed, if not guaranteed, that the patient dies. This is gonna be shown with the next sample of audio. Here, the noises, the hallucinations, the pain have already stopped. The only thing that both the patient and the family are able to find comfort in is that the patient is dead and is not going through that hell anymore. Now, after all that, let's talk about something uncomfortable. How close is rabies to home? Well, in Texas, 350 animal specimens captured by the Texas Department of Prevention for Rabies. So, now let's talk about something uncomfortable. How close is rabies to home? In 2023, out of almost 9,000 specimens of animals captured by the Department of State Health Services of Texas, 350 animal specimens tested positive. This was mainly in bats, foxes, and skunks, and those are actually the main ones in Behar County. 1 out of every 7 bats in Behar County tested positive for rabies in 2024. And also, there has been warnings during the spring about going into the hill country of Texas due to a very mild but still concerning rabies outbreak. A way that the Department of State Health Services takes care of rabies in wild animals is by oral vaccination. But even if that's the case, there's not a human way to track every single animal in Texas. And also because of how massive the state is and how many animals don't get the bait or just don't want to eat the vaccination pill, there's not a way to safely be control or eradicate rabies, especially in the United States and in Texas. As you can see in this map, we have a graphic representation of how spread is rabies during 2024, or this is of May 2024 here in Texas. We have bats, foxes, skunks, and raccoons. In San Antonio, you can see the cumulus of bat symbols and also skunks and some foxes over there. In Austin too, and in Houston. Bats are the main reason why there's rabies transmission in places like, well, in big metropolitan areas like San Antonio, Austin, and Houston here in Texas. But now, even if everything has looked bleak so far, let's talk about our best weapon against rabies, and this is prevention. The first written record of rabies was in 1930 BC in Mesopotamia. Since then, we know about some of the effects of the illness of rabies, and people were starting to suspect that this was an illness. In the first century, rabies is attributed to saliva in dogs. So, a Roman philosopher and doctor called Celsius, he attributed rabies to the saliva in dogs and other animals. But in the 1885 is when we have the big break. Louis Pasteur confirmed successful trial on rabies, successful vaccine. So this is the first time that we get an effective vaccine on rabies, and this is actually gonna impact the US medical field forever, because the celebrity Newark boys get vaccinated in Paris between 1885 and 1886, bringing basically germ theory and rabies vaccines to the United States. And since that path was followed for the United States since the 19th century, in the 20th century we start seeing a requirement of vaccines for dogs and domesticated animals. So now, let's talk about the steps on preventing rabies. First, you need to vaccinate any domesticated animals that live with you. So any domesticated mammals, especially that live with you, need to be vaccinated, and that is specified in various Texas regulations. Then you have to be informed about the geographical center for rabies. So if you live in a place where there has been an outbreak of rabies, or you're planning to travel to a place that had an outbreak of rabies, you need to be informed about that. If bitten, you need to wash the wound eagerly. As we mentioned, there's a lipid bilayer for the rabies virus, and this one gets destroyed with soap. So washing eagerly is seriously gonna reduce your chances of getting rabies. But you need to go to the doctor immediately and then get your vaccination. As soon as possible, you need to go to your doctor and tell them what happened and get your vaccination as fast as possible. This is the only way you can guarantee an almost 100% effective eradication of the rabies virus. So, rabies is almost 100% fatal. It's killing 59,000 people worldwide, costing $8.6 billion annually, and it's 100% preventable. So let's take that into account and keep the word spreading about prevention for rabies. Well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned something from it. That's my main goal, and thank you so much for your attention. Have a good day.